In this video, we're going to go ahead and get our silos and silo missiles set up so that we can implement them later. So I just want to break all the Unity stuff up with all the code stuff so that we don't get confused, because there is quite a bit of configuration we're going to have to do to get the appropriate relationship set up with all the different moving parts of our silo system. So the first thing I'm going to do is move over into my Scratch scene. And remember, this scene is where I have my little sphere here, which I use to set up the appropriate pivot points for my meshes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by creating the silo. Silo is going to start off as an empty game object called silo that is positioned at the origin. I'm then going to open up my assets folder and bring my launchsilo.fbx and import it into my meshes. Once I've done that, I can now add a child game object to my silo, which I'm also going to position at 000, which I just made a big mistake, by the way. Do you see that? I didn't zero out the component before I added it as a child, which you should always do. Oh. So now I've done that, I move it into the silo, and I'm going to name it mesh. This component is going to contain the mesh, so I need a mesh filter. My mesh filter is going to point over into my launch silo. Then I need a mesh renderer. My mesh renderer is going to have a element 0 on its materials set to launch silo. Now you'll notice that the rotation isn't correct. That's easy to fix with this method because my mesh is a child object. I can just go into my rotation tool and I can hold down Control and have it snap into place just like that. Now you see it's pretty close to where it needs to be, but we can do a little bit better by moving into the top view, selecting my move tool, and getting it right into my sphere, like so. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sphere collider for my silo. Now it's important that I attach it to this silo game object, not the mesh. So I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to call it, I'm going to add a sphere collider. I'm not going to call it anything because it's called a sphere collider. And then I'm going to up its radius, and then I'm going to move its center down.
Now, is that because we really don't care where it hits underneath it?
Yeah, it's really irrelevant if a missile hits the silo underneath it. It's just going to be hitting it from one of these points on the top. It's never going to be hitting it from underneath, so we can get away with this. Also, sphere colliders are probably the easiest things to compute for Unity as well. So it's nice that we're able to get a good approximation with this. Okay, well, we're not done yet. I'm not going to turn it into a prefab yet because we need our health bars and our reload bar. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and jump into prefabs, into shared, and I'm going to add in 2 progress bars onto our silo. So I'm going to add in 1 progress bar here, which let's go ahead and orient our camera appropriately. And then I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. Now we have 2 progress bars. I'm going to position them at 000. I'm going to move them up, and then I'm going to select the other one and move him a little bit above him. Then, after I do that, I'm going to parent both these progress bars to my silo. So now our silo is 1 unit that contains our progress bars. Now, to avoid confusion, I'm going to name one of our progress bars health and one of our progress bars reload. The bottom one I want to be the reload bar. The top one I want to be the health bar. I'm going to move the reload bar just a little bit up. That looks better. Okay, the next thing I need to do is I actually need to create the materials for my reload bar, because I want my reload bar to be blue. Right now it's going to be red because that's the default one for the health background and health foreground.
It would be confusing if they were the same color.
Exactly. So I'm going to go into materials, and I'm going to create a new material, and I'm going to call it reload background. I'm going to give it a nice little dark blue color. So let's give it a nice kind of darkish blue thing. And I'm going to click and drag and drop it on the background plane of my reload bar. And I can do that visually here within the scene. Next up, I'm going to go back into materials, and I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it reload foreground. And I'm going to set it to a nice lighter blue. More like a nice little cyan color.
Cyan? Are you
Cyan.
sure?
Well, stuff. And that's not bright enough, so I'm going to need to make it a little bit more brighter. I think that matches it a little bit nicer. Oh, well.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now that a light is on it.
Yep. Okay, so here's our silo, and we have our reload bar and our health bar. Now, we don't have any scripts attached to my silo yet. I'm actually not going to do that yet. Instead, I'm going to move the silo off to the side, and I'm going to build our silo missile next. Then I'll add the scripts. The reason I'm doing that is because our silo will require a reference to the prefab that it shoots out in the form of silo missiles. So now that I've moved it over, I'm going to go into my meshes folder, and I'm going to import my missile2.fbx into my meshes. So that's just a matter of clicking and dragging, and Unity will figure everything out for us. Then I'm going to create a new game object, create a new empty game object. I'm going to orient it onto our origin, and I'm going to rename it Silo Missile. Then I'm going to create another game object. I'm going to name it Mesh. I'm going to put it on the origin, and I'm going to parent it to Silo Missile. So again, we're just doing basically what we did before, those exact same steps. Next, I'm going to add a mesh filter. The mesh filter is going to point to capsule. Which one do I want? I want
Capsule.
This one, 001.
Yeah.
They're both the same name, but this is the one I want, and I can see it down here. So I want capsule 001. Then I want a mesh renderer. The mesh renderer is going to have a material for missile 2. Now, by adding those two things to my mesh, I can now see my missile right there. Let's go ahead and make it just a little bit fatter. The reason I'm doing that is because the... there we go. So 2 in X, 2 in Y, and 1.5 in Z. The reason I'm doing that is so that it can actually look like it came out of that missile silo.
I'm not going to say anything about that.
Alright.
Because I designed the silo for the other missile with fins.
Oh, this will work too. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and orient our missile right into our origin. Then I'm just going to delete the sphere. We're done with the sphere. We've imported all the stuff we need to import, so he's going away. Okay, the last thing I need to do with him is I need to create a collider. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to create a capsule collider. And what we're going to see here is the capsule collider is actually on the wrong axis. So I'm going to switch this to the z-axis, and I'm going to bring his radius a little bit down, and I think that looks pretty good.
That's awesome.
Yep. Finally, I'm going to make sure I set his trigger on it, because remember, or actually in this case, yeah, I'm going to make...
Yeah, we want that triggered. Right.
No, the silo missiles themselves are going to blow up when they hit a point. They actually aren't going to be using any collision
That's
detection.
true. Yeah,
Right.
like the old missile silo game with the
Yeah.
big circly thing.
Mm-hmm. So we're not going to set his trigger to true. Actually, we don't even need a collider. Oh no, we do need a collider, and we'll find out why later. But that doesn't need to be trigger. I'm also going to make sure that my silo has his trigger set to true on his collider. Okay, so now that I've done all of this stuff, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to create the scripts that will be used by both the missile and the silo. So I'm going to go into code, and I'm going to create a new C# file, and I'm going to call it silo. Then I'm going to jump back into Visual Studio, where it's going to ask me if I want to reload my project, which I'll hit reload to. Jump into my silo, delete the code that came with it, format the code properly, And all I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to create, I'm going to do three things. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change what it's inheriting from to targetable. That's because we want to inherit from all of the existing code that we have in targetable. In addition, we want our missiles to be able to hit our silos and target them. So by doing this, we don't have to worry about adding in additional code to our missiles to target silos as well. Not only that, we also inherit our health bar, which we'll see in a moment. Now my silo is going to have a public progress bar, reload bar, because it needs another reload bar for its stuff. And then I want a silo, just a game object called missile. And our missile is going to be the prefab that our silo missile will be created as. So if I jump back into Unity, we'll see that our silo now has, if we were to add the silo component, which we will do right now by clicking and dragging, our silo has a health, a reload bar, and a missile. Let's go ahead and create our silo missile script next, create the prefab for our silo missile, and then we can configure our silo and then make a prefab out of that.
Nelson, what's our warning down there?
There's inconsistent line endings. You can completely ignore that.
Okay. Yay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and create a silo missile. So
You misspelled missile.
Okay, now I have my silo missile script created. I'm going to go back into Visual Studio, reload, fix my line endings, go into silo missile, and I'm going to name it properly because when I created it, I messed up, so now I renamed it. And then on my silo missile, all I really need to do is, well, nothing. Our silo missile is going to have code, but we're not going to actually write any of it yet because it doesn't have any public properties that we want to configure. So I'm going to go back into Unity, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a prefab out of my silo missile. So if I go into my prefabs folder, I have quite a few different folders inside it. There you are. Sorry, I was blind for a second. We have our missiles folder. And I'm going to click and drag my silo missile into my missiles folder. So now I have my silo missile prefab. Now I can delete our silo missile completely, but I'll leave it there because I have a feeling we're going to have to set up some rotation magic on it later.
I suspect.
Yes. Now I can go back to my silo and I can configure it. I'm going to click and drag the health bar that's parented, or that's childed. Childed?
Sure.
Okay.
Or childed.
To our silo, and I'm going to click and drag it onto our health bar field. I'm going to do the same thing with the reload bar. Click and drag onto our reload field. Then our missile field, I'll click and drag from our prefabs, our silo missile onto the missile field. So now, effectively, we have just configured our silo, and I can finally make a prefab out of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to buildings. So I'm going to click and drag on silo into buildings, and we now have a silo prefab. So now let's go ahead and place some silos. I'm going to go back into level 1, and I want 3 silos. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this building, and that building, and that building. And I'm going to bring in 3 silos. So all I'm going to do is click and drag a silo out. I'm going to set his position to the origin. Then I'm going to make sure that I'm going to open up my game view so I can make sure that I'm getting its position to be about there. That should be fine. And then I'm going to duplicate it 2 more times. One over here and one over here. Okay. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more script. And that script is going to be called our player manager. Now again, we're not going to implement it quite in this video, but instead we're just going to get it added and put into our scene. So to do this, the managers, we're going to have a couple managers. We're going to have our level managers, our game managers, and our player managers. I want to group them in our hierarchy. These game objects are going to be nothing more than game objects with scripts attached to them. They're not going to have any visual representation at all or do collision or anything like that. But to keep things organized, I'm going to create an empty game object called managers. Then I'm going to create an empty game object, parent it to managers, or childed it to managers, and I'm going to call it player manager. And then I'm going to create a script called player manager. Which I'm then going to click and drag onto my player manager game object. Now we can see that player manager has the player manager script. Okay, so that's really all the configuration we need to do, and all the unity that we really need to mess with in order to get silos to work. I want to go ahead and just play the game real fast and make sure that our missiles are properly targeting our silos, so we can get a feel for how that works. We can see that our silos are already being targeted, and they indeed are being damaged. Alright, so that concludes getting everything set up for our silos as far as Unity is concerned, and we'll see you in the next video.